Leadership is a kind of a crazy skill that you either have it or you don't. If you have a good leadership skill, you can develop it better. But if you don't have leadership skills, if you don't know how to deal and talk with people, you won't get far. He stayed true to his roots all of his life. From the time he was in the Edmonton Voters Association to City Council, to his time in the legislature, he stayed true to his roots.
Brian, when I first knew him, was at university and was, I guess I could call him a student radical.
I had no intention of joining the fraternity, but I couldn't pass up the price of the accommodation. And then when I moved in, I found out to my horror that it was the young Tory fraternity on campus.
And actually the sort of the young conservatives were operating essentially out of that house. And then Brian moved in, and of course Brian was not a young conservative.
There was a referendum on the National Union of Students, whether the University of Alberta Student Union should join. And of course I was very much in favor of that, and they weren't, of course. They didn't really think that students should be united and fight for the things that they needed.
We thought, well, you know, we were looking for federal candidates. We thought, you know, we might as well start grooming some. So Grant and I met with Brian to try to talk him into becoming a federal candidate. And as I recollect, he thought about it, but we didn't get him right that time.
Grant bought me a cold cup of coffee and a stale egg salad sandwich, and convinced me to run for the NDP federally at that time in 1978. The election was delayed by over a year. My circumstances changed and I withdrew from the nomination. I was looking for a job for just a year or so to pay down some of my student loans. So I ended up taking a job with Transit. I decided to keep it for a while, and it ended up being 8 years.
For a bus driver to be in that seat facing the door as people are coming and going, everybody in the city is riding it, from city councillors to the homeless people and the disabled. Everybody's on our bus. We see them all, we work with them all. It's important in the same way that healthcare and education are important in our society. And bus drivers are the front line of that. They're the face of that very important public service that we provide to each other, to our citizenship.
But you see a lot driving a bus. You see lots of people from different walks of life. And you know, I saw the beginnings of homelessness in Edmonton. We haven't always had homelessness. But I remember when the Thatcher, Reagan, Mulroney policies were implemented in the different countries, and in Canada, you know, people started to be without homes, and I could see them. I could see them on the street. They'd get on my bus.
You know, we've got a lot of homeless people in the major cities, and we've got a lot of social system difficulties. We've got educational difficulties that the industry, you know, doesn't really pay any attention to. But that's the influence of that industry. It's just a tremendous, it has been all over the world. Wherever oil is discovered, there's a tremendous oil system that creates right-wing politics. I mean, it's just realistic. That's the way it is.
A lot of life that, you know, you might not normally see if you're, you know, if you're middle class or, you know, professional person. You may not be exposed to that kind of stuff. But driving the bus in the inner city in northeast Edmonton, I saw a lot of life that is lived by people who I felt needed a voice.
When Brian announced that he wanted to run for city council, his employer, the city of Edmonton, said, "You can't. You're a city employee, so you simply can't do it." And so the only alternative, the two alternatives for Brian were to give up any chance of running for public office or give up his job. And of course, in giving up your job, a place like this, seniority is very important. If you give it up, it's gone. You know, so it was a big risk for Brian. He showed a lot of courage to step forward and say, "Okay, I'll give up my job, but wait till I'm on city council. We're going to fix that."
I soon realized that people didn't know who I was. They didn't know my face or my name. But when I said that I was that bus driver that was trying to run for council, then they lit up and they invited me in and they knew all about it and they were really on my side. So I went back to the campaign manager and I said, you know, we've got to bridge this problem somehow because people don't know who the bus driver is. So we changed the slogan halfway through the campaign to, you know, the bus driver.
Well, you know, Brian was pretty firm in his opinions on things. I mean, he didn't waver very much. Let's be very honest there. But Brian was always focused on what was good for the people. And I think that carried him a long way.
He spent a lot of time with different ethnic communities in Edmonton and trying to find ways for them to be more involved in the city, to benefit by the things that the city would have, programs that could be put together.
I'd book the council boardroom and we'd have 20 people in the room or more sometimes, and just go around and listen to everybody about what they thought, and you could see people would then kind of get on board. They'd get engaged and they would be willing to work for it. There's not a lot you can do as an individual, but if you've got a big chunk of the community on side, then your other council members are much more likely to listen.
Oftentimes when you're trying to make change, you need the support of the public to do that, and so you have to make sure the public understands what you're trying to do so that they can help influence government along the way.
There were a number of shady contracts that were going on, and people started to come to me and tell me about some of this stuff. So I started poking into areas that no other councillors were. You know, the Highland Sewer, for example, was a project that was completely unnecessary, and yet they were going to build a city nearly $20 million for it.
The thinking that suggested that so long as the city grows, everything will be better, you know, and it doesn't matter how it grows, and so that led to a lot of problems in terms of urban sprawl that the city's fighting with today.
A bit of a culture that we'll all sit down with the mayor and members of council, and we'll kind of hash things through as if it was a session for decisions to be made on that. And Brian absolutely, he refused to attend. He brought it forward at council.
Eventually what I did is I found some minutes, a report that had been produced by the administration listing key decisions that had been made at meetings that were held in camera. So I had legal evidence that the council was breaking the law.
He was able to get included in the hiring practices that the city would not discriminate against people because of sexual orientation, and that was one of the key things that were significant at the time, and one of the few cities in the country that had put that in their employment policies. So
I just made an amendment in council to add that, and that would have been in I think about 1990. So it was pretty early on, and it was adopted with only one person voting against it.
At one point, I decided that I needed to pull out of this city council for a bit and recollect my thoughts and thinking and the rest. And it was Brian that I talked with in that. And then I came back a day, 2 days later, I guess it was, and did a media conference. And Brian stood next to me.
He was smeared and he was attacked because he was gay, and it was really very hard for him. You know, and he's always been courageous.
And I'll never forget that support at that particular time, because it was just a very, very bad time for me and for other people who were gay and lesbian in the city. It wasn't just me, of course, but because I was a public figure. So Brian was always involved with any major issues, things that directly affected people in their everyday lives that were oftentimes on the margins or neglected or discriminated against, or whatever term you wish to use.
If Brian hadn't come along, you know, we'd taken, I'd seen the best of times and the worst of times, because in '86 we had 16 seats and, you know, the official opposition, and then '93 we got wiped out. it was a very difficult time for the party then. You know, to be the official opposition 16, all of a sudden you're wiped out. And Pam stepped forward, Pam Barrett, and then Raj got elected. But if it hadn't been for Brian coming along, you know, the party, haven't made big breakthroughs, but we now have a good foot in the legislature. I think we're on the verge of making a breakthrough again. I honestly say if Brian hadn't been there, I'm not sure if there'd be an NDP right now.
Brian knows why he's elected by the people, and he stands by that. His mandate's really clear. He was elected by people who want to make sure the government knows that people are supposed to come before profits. So when it comes to decisions around healthcare and the work that he did in helping to stop the third way, that was a pretty clear mandate he had from his voters, that they wanted to make sure everyone had fair access to publicly funded and publicly delivered healthcare.
Brian and I faced a very powerful government, which had about 80% of the seats in the House. And they had such a network around the province and patronage. They had won over influential people in all communities and all over the place. Our job was to turn things around.
We've been able to get a number of things done. Proper regulation of car insurance in this province. That was because of our work. Stopping the third way and protecting our public health care system. That was our work. Getting changes to the children in care system, including a children's advocate that reports to the legislature. That was our work. And all of which we never had more than 4 seats.
The idea was for some social justice. And I've marched on the legislature, I've stood on the legislative steps and made speeches till my ears froze off. And you just can't kill an idea. As Tommy Douglas used to say, you can't jail an idea.
If there's no opposition at all, if there's no Brian Mason standing there in the legislature or having news conferences or whatever, bringing in a different perspective on issues, then we don't have a democracy.
I think what you'll find with all of my colleagues, that when we go through the first round of leaders having to give their opening question, when we get to Brian, it's okay, let's hear what Brian's got today, because you could almost guarantee that he will be 2 things. 1, fierce, and 2nd, hilarious. He always has these wonderful ways of expressing himself, especially in the comebacks. Whenever they try to answer one of his questions and don't do a very good job at it, you just cringe knowing that something's going to come. He's going to be able to hit them right between the eyes. It's absolutely wonderful to watch.
This government, this premier, this health minister, and indeed the executives that run Alberta Health Services must, as Alberta's NDP always has, stand up for public health care and stand up against 2-tier health care and queue jumping.
To be really clear that no matter what decisions he makes, he has a job to do in this caucus for at least the next 20 years, and that is to write our Christmas video and direct it.
All right, you pansies, listen up.
Sir, yes, sir.
Okay, ladies, I'm going to do the impossible. I'm going to turn you into actual opposition MLAs.
But why?
But why, sir?
But why, sir?
Because, you candy ass, even though you people are nut job rejects from the Fraser Institute School of Neanderthal Economics, I actually like you, and I like right-wing parties. In fact, I like right-wing parties so much, I want there to be 2 of them. Or 3.
And I have to tell you, there's a little grain of truth in that, because we were all brand new, and having somebody who had the skill that he did to be able to learn the to and fro and the rules of the legislature, I think that it was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek video, but there was a little bit of truth behind it too.
He called Ed Stelmach a liar. Ken Kowalski said, "You know that's not appropriate, you can't do it, I'm going to give you a chance to withdraw it." And he stood up and he said, "I won't withdraw it," because he's not telling us the truth. And so he sat down. And so Ken Kowalski, again, and of course he wouldn't have done this for most people. For most people he would have said out. But for Brian, he gave him, 2 or 3 chances. And on the 3rd chance, he said, "Okay, member from Highlands Norwood, I'm giving you one more chance to withdraw that statement. Meanwhile, this was in my first year in the House, and I knew that if he got kicked out that it would be me by myself for the next 2 weeks. So I leaned over to him and I kind of dug my nails into his arm and I said, "You withdraw that damn statement or I will kill you." And so he eventually sort of stood up and said, you know, very reluctantly, "I withdraw the statement even though the facts do not," I mean, I can't remember how he did it, but he was very, very reluctant and very guarded withdrawal.
Tories arguing that we need to go through this very tough decision about deregulating energy. We said, you know, people won't be able to pay their bills, and that he said, oh, people can always use blankets. People in question period, they would sort of poo-poo our questioning. All you need to use is put an extra sweater. So Brian and I brought in some knitting stuff in the legislature. They asked these questions. I never knew how to knit, but so both of us had these needles and we had some yarn, and we began knitting again, you know, during the question period, before the speaker, of course, noticed and stopped us doing this.
His steadfast hanging on to his principles throughout City Council and throughout the legislative sessions is important to building the party, was important to building the party, and it's important that our people carry that kind of flag. The idea of their social justice knowledge and participatory activity in the political arena, but you keep the faith of your roots, and Brian did that.
There's a political issue out there. Brian's going to be often the first one to really see what's important about it and why it matters to Albertans, and he'll see it before 86 other members of this legislature do. And so we've really benefited from that under his leadership. We've benefited from his insight and his intellect and his extremely well-calibrated political lens.
We've had some increases in our seats, we've had some disappointments, but in each election and between each election, we've built the capacity of the party. We've increased its membership and its fundraising capacity. We've organized more active constituencies. We've reached out to more people.
One of the things Brian really showed me is that you don't have to have, you don't have to come from a trust fund. You don't have to do a poli-sci degree. You don't have to be born into politics. Politics is about people and it's about the art of the possible. And he finds ways to help people who are committed, who are passionate and hardworking, take an idea and transform it into action.
It's always about trying to build from where you are to take it to the next stage and to build capacity in the party.
There's a lot of people that Brian's helped make sure that their voices can be heard, and I'm proud to be one of the people on that list.
It makes a difference. It's a way to advance the human condition, to change social conditions. It's worth fighting for, and I certainly have enjoyed it very much. It's been very rewarding for me, and I would recommend it to anybody who wants to build a better community or a better province or a better world.